Hello, everyone. This is John Aristotle Phillips. Thanks for joining our PredictIt webinar today. In the next half hour, I'll be talking with my friend David Rothschild. He's the creator of PredictWise. And we're going to be talking about the value of prediction markets. If you have any questions during the webinar, please email them to events@predictit.org. David Rothschild is an economist at Microsoft in New York City and the creator of PredictWise. He has a PhD in applied economics from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. His most popular work has focused on predicting elections and an economic take on public policy. In 2012, David correctly predicted 50 out of 51 electoral college outcomes. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
So let's start with, I've got a couple questions for you, and then we'll see if the audience has some questions as well. But can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in prediction markets to begin with?
Certainly. So I was trained as an economist, and in graduate school I spent a lot of time learning about market design and understanding how and why people provide information under different contexts, whether or not it's the questions that are being asked or the incentives that people are being offered. And prediction markets offered a really interesting avenue, more transparent than the financial markets, in many ways more interesting in the questions they were asking. And so it became a really fun and meaningful topic to explore.
What makes prediction markets, you've touched on this, but can you talk a little bit more about what makes prediction markets so valuable?
Yeah, prediction markets are valuable to me in three different ways. And the first is that they provide market data on domains that we care about, politics, maybe entertainment, sports, that is otherwise unavailable. And just like we use market data from financial markets to understand the impact of events, how expensive was that oil spill in stock price terms? What was that gaffe that a CEO made? How much did that really cost in the short run? These market tests are something that we can now do in politics and actually see the impact of things that happen during a debate or the impact of endorsements by having second-by-second, very detailed time granularity of the expected outcome. Number two, as I said, the transparency of the markets are very interesting. They allow us to study things about larger markets, financial markets, polling, and other ways in which we aggregate information in ways that would generally be unavailable. So, for example, we're looking at these prediction markets and trying to be understanding what it really is the impact of providing liquidity the way that high-frequency traders provide liquidity in financial markets. Is this good? Is it bad? Can we learn something from how kind of this trading works in prediction markets? And kind of on the other end, a lot of the work that I've been doing is saying, well, we know in prediction markets that people can opt in and provide a lot of information. Well, what about polling? Now that polling is from being random and representative to being kind of opt-in and it's kind of less structured in who's answering the question, could we learn about the types of questions that people ask in prediction markets? Could we learn about the incentives that are utilized? Could this make a difference in how polling evolves over time? And it certainly has impacted it. And the third thing is that, well, they're fun. They're interesting. They get people involved in the topics that are being discussed. And when it comes to politics, I think it honestly is really important. What I like to kind of compare it to is fantasy football. We have all of these people who spend 10, 15 hours a week watching NFL football where they may have only watched their home team a few years ago because the fantasy element gets them involved. They want to know everything about it. Now, wouldn't that be nice if that's the way that people viewed our democratic instruments, whether or not it was the debates or whether it was press conferences or whether it was actually just the information and policy decisions underlying these elections and these other outcomes?
That's really interesting to me. Can you is there evidence that fantasy sports drive engagement or consumption of content? And is there evidence that the same is true in politics?
Look, it's a very weird relationship between fantasy sports and the NFL and the NBA and the other major sports leagues. First, they fought it in a way because they were concerned about the possible corruption effects of gambling, and then they embraced it. Then they embraced it because they realized that, number one, that in major sporting leagues, the players are getting paid too much. The stakes are too high to worry as much as they used to about the incentives of gambling corrupting what people do. And on the flip side, that it was bringing in a huge amount of people who were paying attention to all sorts of nuances about the event that wasn't being done before, and they saw this as a huge financial boon because people were watching more, because people were buying more data, because people were engaging in all different levels. And I think you can look at a similar parallel in politics where we see that, look, we're talking about $10 billion or so is going to be invested in this campaign in order to create the leadership of what is essentially a $4 trillion a year operation. The money that is flowing in and out of prediction markets is not going to affect or encourage people to affect the election outcome as much as it is going to have that other effect we're talking about, which is people paying attention in ways in which they haven't done in the past. And I like to point to people externally who are not involved in the prediction markets at all to the discussion threads on Predictive, because as many of you tuning in and as you, John, know, it has been very impressive how quickly and efficiently people have reacted to news and talked about the news that is driving them. Prediction markets are supposed to aggregate dispersed information, supposed to provide objective numbers to idiosyncratic information, and you can see it right there in the discussion threads and the number of people that are engaging on not just Predicted, but also with bookies and with markets worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with that. I mean, the discussion threads are just fascinating to me. It's actually a really civil tone that in most of this conversation, almost irrespective of which market people are commenting on, and the volume of the comments, and the number of people that are participating, it's impressive to me. But I'm easily impressed by that sort of thing. So can you talk a little bit about? I want to come back to the value of political prediction markets to the democratic process. But before we do, I'd like you to talk a little bit, if you would, about PredictWise, which is your baby, and just super interesting. What's the story behind its creation, and why did you create it?
Sure. So in 2009 or so, when I was still in grad school, I was starting to acquire a lot of prediction market and polling data on a regular basis, and I created PredictWise for two reasons. Number one is that as a researcher, I realized that if you don't do things in real time, you're going to forget to grab some of the data that you ultimately need, and you're going to suffer from what we call a look-ahead bias, in that if I go and construct forecasts out of prediction market data or polling data or any other data after the event's over, you already know the outcome, and it's not a very healthy way to create forecasts ex post. So creating them in real time forced me to gather the right data and forced me to be very thorough and very correct in how I aggregate the data. But more important, kind of with that, I saw that I was spending a lot of time then answering people's questions about the data. And so I decided not just to create a site for myself, but something in which my friends and family and now others can see the data move in real time, so I didn't have to keep on directly responding to emails and phone calls about who is going to win the upcoming election.
And were you the only person at Wharton studying this? Were you the originator of all this, or was there a professor there that you studied under?
Well, no question. I owe a lot to my graduate school advisor, Justin Wolfers. Many of you may see his work in the Upshot on the New York Times, as well as his incredibly detailed Twitter account. But yeah, Justin was studying this before me. He was my advisor. We got going with a bunch of things, and it's been really pleasant to have such incredibly smart and engaged advisors in grad school, and then kind of branching out past that into kind of more questions about market design, and also more questions about how markets feed our understanding of polling and social media data and other forms of individual level data that people are providing us and that we use to aggregate forecasts and understand sentiment.
So is there ongoing study? So Wolfers, of course, is like yourself, just a pioneer in this area. Is there academic research going on currently at Wharton regarding prediction markets that you know of?
Well, I can't speak as much to Wharton as I can kind of speak to the general academic community. And what I think what interests a lot of people is that most of the research is not on kind of what you see on Predicted, which is a continuous double auction. So here we have people trading with each other. What the research is spending a lot of time on, and I could talk to Robin Hanson at GMU, a lot of my colleagues here at Microsoft, Mira Dudick and David Pennick and others, and around the world, is focusing on market makers. And so these are algorithms that are created to absorb information that is occurring in the market and essentially trade commerce. Market makers allow the markets to have someone on the other side of any possible trade. And kind of two really interesting features of market makers that we've been exploring is, number one, can you make a fully combinatorial market maker, which means that could I have a market with tons of different outcomes and allow people to trade against any outcome and have that trade affect the price of all related outcomes. And number two is, as information flows in, how does that market maker absorb new information? How quickly does it absorb that new information? And otherwise, we describe it, how liquid is that market? So how much does an individual trade move the market price? These types of market makers will help add liquidity in the future. They'll help eliminate arbitrage opportunities, which keep people focused on providing new information into the markets.
Wow, that's interesting. You know, we signed up on Predicted. We welcomed two new universities, University of Canberra and the University of Kansas this morning, to the list of 19 other academic institutions that are taking anonymized data from Predicted and studying it. So it's interesting. Can you talk a little bit about let's go back in time. What's the history of prediction markets, and then I'm going to ask you about the future of prediction markets, perhaps tying into what you were just talking about. So go back a little bit and what were the first prediction markets around politics?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the University of Kansas, and my good friend Coleman Strumpf has done great research on markets that occurred at the turn of the 19th century. So early 1900s, we had extremely robust markets. A huge percentage on the last few days before the election, some number, I can't remember the exact number, 5–10% of trades on Wall Street were actually people trading stock on the upcoming elections in 1916, 1920, et cetera. Then as the stock markets moved inside, off of the curb, it became less fashionable. And then the Iowa market emerged in the early 1990s to kind of bring back prediction markets. And obviously, we saw the growth of in-trade and then Predicted, as well as the prediction markets around the world, the biggest being Betfair, which trades publicly and has several $1 billion per year running through their markets. Prediction markets have been effective prior to the advent of traditional polling, and I think that's a key thing to remember. They're not just absorbing polling, they're absorbing a lot more dispersed information, a lot more idiosyncratic information, and primaries are a great example of where prediction markets thrive in that here we see it's very hard to build a model based off of polling data to look at something that happens once every 4 years and has a lot of idiosyncratic nature to it. And this is why you see prediction markets really thriving in the media and kind of in the forefront of the data nerds this cycle, because it really shows a strength. Once we hit the general election and we look at kind of state-by-state electoral, you'll see the prediction markets as we hit election day really start to converge with polling because there won't be as much additional information out there for markets to aggregate. But as we think about all the other questions that predicted is carrying on, I think there'll be many places where you'll see prediction markets providing a unique objective data point to what you can get from the traditional data sources.
What do you mean by idiosyncratic information, and how's that different from other types of information that might flow into a prediction market?
And so basically, when I say idiosyncratic information, I mean kind of two different things. Number one, things in which just happen so rarely, there's no way that we could have a model for how that affects something. You were telling me today that you're out in Salt Lake. You know, last cycle, we had Mitt Romney running for president. You know, this was something people wanted to model. What would be the effect of a Mormon running for president? Well, you know, we never had a Mormon running for president before on a major party ticket, and so we had inclinations that this would affect the vote in Nevada, affect the vote in Utah, but you can't really model something like that. It's an idiosyncratic thing. You can write down a variable for it, but since we don't have any history, can't model it. The kind of next step from it is things which are just hard to even put down into a variable, which is say, when you look at some candidates and you see a much higher % chance that they are going to have a major gaffe, or a much higher % chance that they may have a health risk, or a higher % chance that something's going to happen between now and election day that's going to positively or negatively affect their outcome. This is the type of thing that a market to take into account, but a model sports have the least amount of dispersed and idiosyncratic information. I can build a nearly perfect model for a regular basketball game or hockey game or football game. And if I had the stat feed running through my model, I could show you the probability in real time very easily. But yet, this is what people want to engage in, right? Because the more idiosyncratic, the more difficult, the less there is a great number of people who want to engage in that and pull that information together. But if you look towards things like entertainment and marketing results, a great example would be the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which has operated for years on thinking about box office returns. If you look at Betfair and other markets have had a very long and good history with award shows, something which is very hard to model and something that they do very well in aggregating dispersed and somewhat idiosyncratic information over. So in one way, the thing that things are most robust on is the thing that we actually need markets the least for, but it does bring people into thinking about markets and hopefully as a gateway to other more kind of meaningful domains.
Okay, so this is really interesting, I think, to a lot of people. So is there a difference between the way someone in the UK on Betfair looks at, let's say, the U.S. elections and makes a prediction and the accuracy of the prediction from the way a U.S. citizen might?
This is what I can tell you. I can tell you that in 2012, the Betfair prices for the U.S. Elections were trailing the in-trade prices. And so if you made a model in which you took Betfair prices and tried to project that what there'd be in 12 hours from now, you were best to use in-trade prices right now. And so that definitely is an indication that they were either following along or that they were getting information slower. That being said, there's also a well-known difference between Betfair prices and in-trade prices, which seem to have been possibly motivated by people or one person in the U.S. who was pushing prices with a certain agenda, or maybe it was possibly that there was a different kind of pro-democratic bias in European-based markets that you did not see in American-based markets. There's definitely a good possibility that there is dispersed information that is known to American traders that is not known to European traders. That would make sense. They are on the ground. It's sometimes hard to fully isolate it, but there's definitely evidence that markets in Europe trade differently and have at many points different prices, either kind of continuously or lagged than American-based markets.
That's interesting. How long was the lag between the Betfair and the in-trade information coming into them, or prices, I guess you'd say?
I mean, the prices were lagging somewhere between like 8 to 16 hours behind. And when you looked at kind of when news was breaking, there definitely seemed to be some indication that the markets in Europe were slower during the key hours in the early evenings when it's early morning in Europe, but kind of prime trading time in the U.S. And so, it's hard to say exactly what's driving it, but definitely there was this lag both when news was breaking and on a daily basis.
That's interesting. How about within the United States, for instance? Is there an advantage if you are, or is there a difference between how, say, Iowa residents predicted the outcome of the Iowa caucuses from non-Iowa residents, people who live in other states? Or do we know that yet?
I would say not with a strong academic rigor, but we have me along with some of the people on your team have looked at this question, and we did see evidence that the Iowa-based traders were, on election day at least, a little more effective in the trades that they're making. We hope to expand that out and basically learn a little more about whether or not it's possible that there was some dispersed information that local traders were capitalizing on to their advantage.
So speaking of the individual traders, whether it's in the UK or the US, and whether predicted or its predecessor in-trade or Iowa markets, what makes for a more accurate predictor in a political prediction market? Are there traits that you can pinpoint?
One of the things that Rajiv Sethi of Columbia and I have been exploring, which we find just fascinating, is that looking at in-trade data from 2012, we saw that the vast majority of traders continuously traded on one side of the market or the other. So they're either constantly buying Obama or Democrats or constantly buying Romney or Republicans, and yet the prices continue to balance and people make or lose money in that scenario. What we believe is that there aren't that many neutral traders in the market who are fully willing to take long on either side. This may be different in a primary than it is in a general, but it'll be interesting to see how much advantage those types of traders can take in the long run, because there are a lot of traders who really don't want to take long positions against their beliefs. And also, of course, the most effective ultimately are people who have very strong strategies in understanding the relationships between multiple markets and take advantage of those in times of high information flow.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit, please? What do you mean?
Yes. So basically, what we've seen in the past is that there are a few traders who really take advantage of the fact that there are many interrelated markets, and those people are noticing both conditional outcome spaces as well as kind of things that are the same underlying variables. So, for example, as election returns are coming in on March 15th, you would probably have noticed over the while that the March 22nd primaries were moving to reflect this incoming information. This is hard to trade both at the same time, but some people definitely take advantage of that. And then those are conditionally, those are related kind of independently to the same kind of underlying variable of the popularity of the two candidates, or the 4 candidates or 3 candidates, depending on the market you're looking at. Then you look at things like probability to be nominated and probability to win. These are conditionally related to each other. Some traders will be quicker on the gun on those kind of conditionally related markets. And then as we head into the general, you'll see a lot more of the electoral college relationship to the outcome of the Democratic Party winning or the individual candidates winning, and understanding those relationships and taking advantage of those quickly will allow for some traders to both provide liquidity to move the market forward, but also make a little money in the process.
Interesting. That's fascinating stuff, David. It's incredible. Okay, so let's see. Let's see if we have any questions from the those who have been listening in. Aubrey, have we got any questions for the remaining 5 minutes or 4 minutes of our?
I do, yes. So one of our questions, I believe this came up when, David, you were talking about idiosyncratic information. So this person wanted to know, you were talking about different scenarios, maybe building models for things like basketball games, hockey games, football games. What about something like a horse race?
Building models for horse racing. So horse racing is really interesting in markets for several reasons. Number one, it's huge. And so horse racing kind of dominates a lot of the external markets. Number two, there's a really interesting time element with horse racing, especially because of the slight delay that happens when you watch on television versus if you were there in person. So that is a bit of an interesting question as far as the value that you can get versus if you were, say, on Betfair and trading against people who have very sophisticated algorithms and possibly maybe live the track. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of people who claim to do very well overall with horse racing despite the take, and there's a lot of public information, a huge amount of public information. There's a huge question about when you look at the morning lines and how they are related to the eventual probabilities and the true probabilities. And so there definitely is, that just like any other sport, there's a pretty strong ability to make a very strong model for horse racing, but it's probably not as predictive. There's a little more uncertainty than you're going to get in professional sports, which have a much more consistent outcome.
Great. So our next question is, could you talk about prediction markets' potential contributions to the world of politics?
Yes. So look, prediction markets have the ability to help move us past the horse race, and I think that's going to be a kind of tricky question. I think that there's obviously value in understanding who's going to win and who's going to win where, and that value stems both to investors who want to decide where to, provide donations to the candidates themselves and decide where they're spending money and having a better understanding of it, to political scientists who get a better understanding of the impact of events and the outcomes. My great hope is that prediction markets can also help us move past that into a more of a conditional outcomes phase where we think about the impact of the elections on policy. This is a little bit harder, and I think that PredictWise has done a good job innovating towards that space, and is something which I really have a lot of hope for in the future, and that we can think not just about whether Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump will be the next president, but more importantly, what will be the status of the GDP in the years following either a Trump or Clinton presidency, questions about war and peace, and questions about civil liberties and civil rights and other social issues. That will help create a more informed electorate and really let us understand better the impact of elections on policy, which is truly the reason why we care about elections in the first place.
David, listen, It's just fascinating stuff. We're running out of time, and I wanted to thank you again for helping as an advisor and your contribution in this area. David is the creator. David Rothschild has been my guest. He's the creator of PredictWise, and he's one of the really influential thinkers in the area of prediction markets. So I've been delighted to have him with us this morning. Thank you to all of those who joined the webinar. I see we had a couple hundred people that signed up, and that's terrific. I hope all of you are having a great time with PredictIt. If you have any suggestions on who you'd like to see as a future guest on one of our webinars, would you send them to us, please, at events@predictit.org. Thanks again, David.
Thank you for having me, and to the traders out there, good luck.
Good. Thanks very much.